start, and I would like to welcome you all to this in the first session of the first parallel session of OR62. I'd like to welcome you to this, looking at the impact of COVID-19 on the third sector, on organisations that are non-profit, neither private sector nor public sector. And the aim is to prompt ideas on how operational research can help. Before we move on to talk about the programme, I would like, if Amy wouldn't mind, to launch a poll which asks you to tell us who you are. We'd like to know who's in the audience and roughly where you are in the world and in your working life. So Amy, would you mind launching the poll while I carry on talking about what the programme will be? Thank you. So while you're filling that in, can I just say, if any of you joined hoping to hear Tris Lumley from New Philanthropy Capital, who was originally billed as one of our speakers, I'm very sorry, but unfortunately Tris is unwell and has been unable to join us. And I'm enormously grateful to Catherine Mahoney and Rodri Davis from Charities Aid Foundation, who have stepped into the breach. That'll be followed by, after about 20 minutes, that'll be followed almost immediately by Steve White from the Marie Curie charity, which many of you will be familiar with. And then we will move into a Q&A and more general discussion, which might open up the questions of how can OR and analytics help. So Amy, I can share the results of that poll, or is Amy? Is that now sharing the results? I hope it is. And I can say that 3/4 of the people in the room are analytics professionals. A small number of you are charity employees and charity volunteers, and most of you are UK based, and some from other parts of the world. And I'd like to welcome you all very much to this session. And I do have some housekeeping. I'm told you should position the speaker in the top right corner so you can see all the slides. That doesn't work for me when I try it, but do try. Any messages for each other or for the organisers should come via the chat. Questions for the speakers, please use the Q&A function. And if you see other people's questions in there that you want to vote for to push them up the ranking order for answering, then do vote for them. Videos will be produced and emailed, and a feedback survey will also be produced and emailed. So without further ado, I will introduce Catherine, who is Research Manager at Charities Aid Foundation, and he's going to be accompanied by Rod, who is the Head of Policy there. Charities Aid Foundation is an enormously important organisation in the charity finance world, and I'm sure Catherine will say a little bit more about that when she speaks. But over to you, Catherine. Very much looking forward to this talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ruth. We're really delighted to be here. So thank you very much for allowing us to step into the breach, as you put it. Yeah. So just to briefly explain the purpose of this short session today, we're going to be sharing with you the findings of some recent research that we have done with charities on the impact of COVID on them as an organisation, and then we're going to briefly look at how we've managed to use that research in an impactful way. I'm just going to share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see that okay? Hopefully that's working all right. Okay, so just a sort of very brief introduction to Rod and I, and why we feel we might be qualified to tell you anything about this subject. So Rod and I work for Charities Aid Foundation, or CAF, as we're also known, and we are one of the largest charities, actually, that you quite possibly never heard of. So I think last time I heard we were something like 6th or 7th largest charity in the UK. We are a champion for better giving, which in practice means that we facilitate giving any way we can. So we, for example, we own a bank called CAF Bank, which is dedicated bank for charities. So we offer lending to housing associations to help them build developments. We help charities manage their investments. We offer them current accounts and so on. We offer products and services to corporates. So the Give As You Earn scheme is run by us. So if you've ever made a donation via your payroll, so it comes off, you know, you get the tax benefit, that may have been done by Give As You Earn, which we run. So we're a big charity. We are cause neutral, but a lot of our work is around advocacy for the civil society sector in general. And one of the tools that we use to help us advocate for the sector is research, which is what we're going to talk about today. So just very briefly to sort of give you an idea of the kind of the flavour of the sort of research that we do, and just to put this into context. So over here on the left-hand side of the slide, we've got some of our bigger research pieces, our sort of flagship pieces. So we've got UK Giving, which is an ongoing monthly survey that we do with the general public, nationally representative survey of the general public. And we've been running that for a number of years, and that's looking at charitable behaviours really. So whether we ask people whether they donated money, whether they volunteered, how much they donated and what to, and we can look at trends that way. We also produce something called the World Giving Index, which looks at 3 key giving behaviours across the world. So that takes account of about 140, 150 countries each year. And then also another one of our reports is the Charity Landscape Report, where we survey charity chief execs about their concerns and challenges. So that the image you can see there was last year's report, which it's probably too small to see, but last year it was very much sort of Brexit focused. Obviously I mean, that's very much on the agenda, but you know, this year's will look quite different, I'm sure. On the right hand side, we've got a few bits of policy stuff. So I don't know if Rod, if you want to just give a very quick overview of that.
Yeah, more than happy to, Kat, and hello to everybody. Thanks very much for having us today. I mean, as Kat has already outlined there, one of the things we do with our policy work is use it to inform, with our research work, is to use it to inform policy and public affairs work, which is centred on furthering CAF's kind of core charitable mission of supporting civil society in the UK and beyond, and ensuring that people are able to give to it as effectively as possible. We do that through a mixture of things, which I'll talk about a little bit later on in the context of the work we've done around COVID, but essentially it's straightforward policy work of the sort that you might imagine, involvement with civil servants and politicians in different departments, trying to inform and influence them to ensure the environment for giving and civil society is as healthy as possible. But also we use it to go beyond that. We have an in-house think tank called Giving Thought, where we build on the research work and the expertise that we have and sort of extrapolate and think about some of these issues from a bigger picture and longer term perspective to try and think through what might be coming next. And that's certainly some of what we've been doing during this period of pandemic. I think that's probably enough for now. Yeah.
Thanks, Rod. Okay, so COVID research. So as the crisis sort of started to unfold, we knew that we needed to talk to charities about their experiences and what was going on for them. And we knew from other sources and from what our own customers were telling us on the phone, for example, that, you know, this was going to be a major challenge for lots of charities. So we very much sort of tried to use the resources that we had to hand, and I'm just sort of mindful of the audience that we've got here. This was all about getting information, as much information as we could, as quickly as possible that would be useful. So it was definitely not about perfect research, which unfortunately it isn't, but it was very much about, you know, what can we do quickly that will be of benefit to the sector and to other interested parties. So we actually went about doing, I think in the end it was 14 separate polls with charities over the course of this pandemic. So since I think the first one was in mid-March, just before we locked down, and we got about just under 5,500 individual responses across all of the different surveys and all of the different questions. So they were very much sort of point in time. Some of them are only open, the polls were only open for 24 hours or so. So the idea was to sort of get a snapshot of what was happening, you know, as we went through the pandemic. We were a little bit worried about, you know, were we were we going to be pressuring charities by asking them to do these polls for us? But actually, I think it was almost the opposite. We had high response rates, quite a lot higher than normal in some cases, and lots and lots of rich verbatim answers to our questions. So I think charities actually were quite glad to have a way of sharing what was happening for them, essentially. So we'll just take a look at some of the results of the surveys next. So our first polls were very much about how charities were surviving, or even whether they were surviving. So the first one that we did, as I mentioned earlier, was I think it was about 1 week before the full lockdown, and that was asking, so it's not actually displayed on this chart, but that was asking about what charities needed right now from the government to help them, and overwhelmingly the answer was cash of some kind, so either unconditional grants or making funds that are restricted for particular uses unrestricted, so they could be used for whatever they were needed for. Some of them also mentioned that they needed help with tech or protective, personal protective equipment. But overall, they needed money, and sort of that links onto the chart that you can see here on this slide, which is showing the answers to a more direct question that we asked early on in the pandemic, around how long they would actually be able to continue at all before they had to shut their organisation for good, which showed that 3 in 10 charities said that they wouldn't be able to carry on for more than a year. And I know that other organisations had done some similar sort of research which gave similar results. So unfortunately, a lot of charities found themselves in a bit of a catch-22 early on in the pandemic, where they were unable to furlough staff because there was high demand for their services, but at the same time their income, their ability to fundraise, for example, had just fallen away. I mean, we know that, things like the London Marathon, for example, raises hundreds of millions of pounds a year, and so that was all lost income that charities would normally have been able to rely on. So just a couple of examples here. So one charity says, our charity normally provides older people's dementia daycare, which also brings in income from charges of around £40,000 a month. We won't get that income, but we can't furlough our staff as we need them for the increase in demand. There seems to be no way to recoup what we have lost or what we are spending. Another charity says self-generated income stopped overnight, and that was about 40% of their income. Our charity has approximately 3 months to be able to continue to pay wages before the money will just cease to be there. So, it's dire straits for some charities at that point, and probably still. And there were other issues as well, so not just financial. So, for example, another charity, which is a therapeutic service working with young people, said that their clients who were already struggling anyway were now also anxious on top of that, and that working remotely with their clients proved challenging in terms of safeguarding because the charity's staff were concerned that they might miss things, especially where there was domestic violence or parental mental health problems and that sort of thing. So a challenging time. And as I sort of said, for a lot of charities, a bit of a double whammy, really. So they had less money just at the same time as demand was greatly increased. And you can see some of these results here. So just over half of charities said that they'd had decreased donations. 3 in 10 had seen an increased demand, and actually for a lot of those, the demand was really quite seriously up. It wasn't a small uptick. It was, it was a big increase in demand. And there are other sort of challenges as well around that. So we know from our UK Giving survey, the monthly survey that I mentioned at the beginning, that older people, for example, are one of the groups more likely to be involved in volunteering with charities and in the community. And of course, they're also at this time more likely to be self-isolating and unable to get involved in the usual way. So there were clearly lots of challenges for many charities at that time. But as we all have done, like with this event, charities were, adjusting to the changes and adapting in the ways that they could. So as for most of us, they started working remotely. Lots of them told us that they'd done that. Also, there were new ways to deliver services. So, for example, one centre which had provided music therapy and dancing and singing and cookery and that sort of thing, to its clients, managed to go on and establish new remote support networks, which involved phoning around all of their at-risk clients and their carers, and signposting them to other services and providing them with YouTube videos to keep them exercising and singing and whatever they would have been doing in the day centre. Another church told us how it had redirected its volunteers to help vulnerable people in the community, for example. And again, we know from the UK Giving Survey that lots of members of the public said that they had been involved in that sort of thing, helping out their neighbours with the shopping or getting prescriptions for their elderly neighbours and so on. So for some charities, actually, there was a positive in that, and I think probably this would include Charities Save Foundation as well to some degree. There was a sort of acknowledgement that the crisis had forced them to digitise. To accelerate moving to online fundraising, or to just generally to modernise. At the same time, there was a concern that people would be inclined to carry less cash, and that this could have a big impact on their income. We know from our UK Giving Survey that cash is by far and away the most common way of giving to charity, and we also know from the same study, because we asked it a couple of months ago, that people are less inclined to use cash now because of the pandemic, because of concerns about handling banknotes and so on. So there was concern around whether or not there was going to be a shortfall in donations, but most charities did say that they were able to take digital donations, which is a positive. For a small minority, about 10%, they said that they couldn't afford the technology, unfortunately, and that chimes with some other of CAF's experience. We set up a fund to make grants to charities to help them through this crisis, and one thing that they did frequently ask about was money to help them with tech of one sort or another. So as the restrictions sort of started to be lifted, which was in June, I think, so we asked, what are your biggest fears for your charity over the next couple of months? And their biggest fears were having to reduce their services in the future. So we know from other polls that we conducted with them that quite a lot of charities, I think about a third of the ones that we spoke to, were going to be using the furlough scheme. So in the summer, perhaps they were thinking about having to start to pay those part-time salaries as they brought people back, which maybe has fed into this concern about having to reduce the services. Likewise, concern about how to manage social distancing in the workplace or when working with beneficiaries. So clearly, financial concerns very much still high up on the list of worries. Around the same time that lockdown eased, we asked charities how hopeful or not they were for the future, and around half said that they hadn't actually been a change in their outlook. But amongst the rest, there was more hope than not hope. So some green shoots. So some charities told us that they were able to get volunteering going again, especially for activities that were out of doors, or the opening of some arts venues had a big impact, because of course lots of museums and art galleries, etc., are actually charities. And also just around people generally feeling more confident to sort of go out and about their lives a bit more like normal. So sort of latterly, we asked what the biggest surprises were to come out of the pandemic, and we found actually that there was some resilience, especially around the organisations themselves and how they felt that they had risen to the challenge. So whilst there were some negative comments as well about support for the sector, but generally speaking, there was some positivity around how the organisation had adapted, and the resilience of staff, and the willingness of people to get involved and to help volunteer. And in fact, we did ask directly, was there anything positive to come out of the lockdown? So the most positive outcomes that were mentioned were the ability to successfully work from home and adapt to new technology, like many of us have had to do. Lots of charities say that they embraced this sort of new increased online presence, and it had allowed them to reach a wider audience. So one charity, for example, said that the innovation of a digital service has widened their audience. We've kept some young people and lost others, but we found new ones who wouldn't normally have access to face-to-face service. So there was also increased engagement with members for charities, and some talked about the community support that they'd received and how actually they felt like the community around them saw them in a new light and sort of valued what they were bringing. So many welcomed these developments and said that they weren't necessarily something that they would have foreseen, but they were positive outcomes from the lockdown specifically. And so most of them were able to say something positive, but very few said that absolutely nothing positive came out of the situation, which is good. So just coming on to the impact of the research. So, you know, why we did this and what we did with it. And Rod's just going to spend a couple of minutes telling us about that. Over to you, Rod.
Thanks, Kat. And I'll keep this brief because I'm aware we're close to time, and I can always say a bit more about it in the Q&A later if people want to. But essentially, just to outline some background on what we actually did with the kinds of findings that Kat has been talking about in order to make sure they actually had the impact that we wanted. I mean, one there, as you can see on the right, is that we use a lot of these findings in kind of broad media work, whether that's radio, television, or kind of print media, just to make sure that there's an informed debate about charities and how things like the pandemic are affecting them, and that continues to be part of public consciousness. Focusing in on the other two there. So the other things that we try to do, I mean, we try to inform and influence government in ways that we think are going to help and support the sector. You know, a key department in that is DCMS, because they have the brief for civil society, and we were involved in regular ongoing meetings with them, where one of the things we did was kind of provide them with weekly snapshots of what was happening in the sector in terms of public attitudes, the attitudes of charities, how giving behavior was changing, and all the sorts of things we've been talking about. And that's important, again, in that it kind of gave a more nuanced picture of what was going on and the sort of distributional differences in terms of geography and cause size and organizational size that we might be seeing across the sector. And we used that as the basis for some sort of proactive policy work, putting forward a raft of policy ideas that we thought could be implemented potentially to help the sector. It was an extremely difficult time. And then the other thing that we try to do with the research and policy work that we do is to inform the charity sector itself. And so we set up a research hub where all of the kind of bits of weekly research that we were doing, that we mentioned, were collated. We used those as a basis for internal webinars and events. We spoke widely at kind of external events outlining the details of some of our findings, wrote articles and blogs again on that. And then just to flag up the logo there for 360 Giving, which is a very interesting open data initiative within the charity sector that's been running for a number of years. And the data from the Emergency Coronavirus Response Fund that CAF's set up was fed into that, which was the first for CAF and something we were very excited about, so that we could contribute to building up what was, you know, quite a detailed picture of where philanthropic and charitable money was going and how that was being effective in meeting the needs during the pandemic. And certainly, you know, we're hopeful that's something we can build on more in the future. I'll just hand back very briefly to Kat to round up there.
Thanks, Rod. Yes, I'm aware that we are out of time, so I will just, in 20 seconds or so, just to sort of summarise what we said. So essentially, this has been an incredibly challenging time for lots and lots of different kinds of charities. You know, they've had more demand than ever, whilst at the same time, lots of the ways that they make money have just disappeared. But, you know, there is some resilience in the sector, and, you know, lots of organisations, CAF included, but many others are working to help charities come through this and out the other side. So thank you very much for your attention, and over to you, Ruth.
Thanks very much, Catherine and Rod. That was really, really interesting, and actually a good base from which to launch our next speaker, Steve, whose focus is on fundraising, which, oh, sorry, I've just lost my pictures. Excuse me. Yeah, who's Steve's focuses on fundraising, which we've just heard is one of the biggest concerns of charities at all times, but certainly in COVID. Steve did a master's in OR at Southampton University and started his career as an OR analyst at British Airways, but since branched out into broader analytics, data analytics work. And for the last 4 years, he's been providing insight to fundraising for Marie Curie, which I'm sure is one of the better known of the larger charities. Last year, he and colleagues won the Institute of Fundraisers' Best Use of Insight Award. And last week, he won Marie Curie's Best Staff Fundraiser Award. So I'm really looking forward to Steve's talk. Over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Ruth. I'll just...
And I should just say, do please, audience, put questions that are emerging into the Q&A session as we go. Sorry, Steve, definitely over to you now.
That's okay. Hopefully you can see my screen. Do shout someone if you can't. So yes, thank you for the introduction, Ruth. Yeah, my name's Stephen White, and I guess I got this title Fundraising Insights Manager at Marie Curie, but as I'll explain on the forthcoming slides, I view my role as operational research, and you know, I've always been an operational research kind of practitioner, and this is the first time I presented at the OR conference since the young OR conference days in New York in the 1990s. So 30 years later, here I am, which feels really strange, talking to the OR group, which is great.
We can't see your slides yet, Steve.
Can't you? That's not good. Let me just try again. Don't understand why you can't see them. Can you see them now?
Yeah.
Great.
Perfect. Just start the slideshow and we'll be off.
Hopefully the viewer will come on. So you can see them all in full now, Ruth. Yeah, can you confirm?
Perfect.
Great.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm not used to using Zoom. I use Teams all day long. I view my role, as I say, sort of applying maths and IT to solve business problems. I'm a really practical kind of data analysis person. And in the next 20 minutes or so, I just want to sort of give an idea of what it's been like internally working for a charity like Marie Curie and how we've coped with COVID pretty much since March the 23rd when we went down to lockdown. And I've given this talk a kind of gimmicky, cheesy title, Visibility, because I think it's quite a nice way of structuring what I do with these kind of 4 eyes in visibility. And first and foremost, when I am normally in an office in London, I sit amongst the fundraisers. I don't like to sit, if you like, it's quite controversial, around fellow maths and IT people. I like to be involved in fundraising, which for me is, I don't know, it feels refreshing. And, you know, I get to hear about their problems by being with them all day long and hot desking around the different fundraising teams. Just the way I kind of like to work. And I'm going to focus on these 4 eyes of income, investigate, inform, and insight, and just kind of take them in that order, to, as I say, to give you a sort of practical feel of what it's like to be an OR analyst in a charity. Just a very brief mention about Marie Curie. Sometimes people think we're a cancer charity, and not quite right. We're here to, you know, care for people with any terminal illness. So cancer, I think, is about 70% of the patients we care for. And fundamentally, we're quite different to other charities like Macmillan in that we have 9 hospices around the UK. Typically, our nursing service is about overnight care for several hours. And the long and short of it is there are some quite unique aspects of our care and service business that is very different to other charities in that kind of medical health sector. I'm not going to talk too much about what we do. It kind of says it on the tin. We have a wonderful set of nurses that look after terminally ill people, and broadly 40 to 50,000 patients a year that we care for. I had a bit of fun when I joined back in 2016, messing about with my job description and just put it through a simple kind of word cloud, really, just to see what words came up. And, you know, quite a nice way of showing a job description, but at the heart of it is fundraising. Also at the heart of what I think about is what's in it for the very great people that give money to our cause, so the supporters. And obviously the word data and communications and other things come out of it, but quite a nice way of summarizing my role. I have a team, it's just been two of us really for the last 4 years, that deliver basically robust and insightful analysis, as it says at the bottom there, to sort of make data-driven decisions. So there's no point in really being an analyst in a charity or any organization if you're not going to save time or save money or improve income. So that's kind of what I'm here for, to make that kind of tangible difference. And I use all sorts of different techniques, but I manipulate data with SQL. I visualize it in Power BI. I do Excel scenario modeling, and just generally sort of apply all my practical math, stats and IT skills that I've learned over a 30-year career. But I do call it operational research, as I've said before. I'm going to go into some very quick examples of my 4 I's. So the first one is income. And this diagram's always kind of one that's in my head. I'm heavily involved in the communications, if you like, the pieces of mail that arrive in everybody's post, and some people think it's in junk mail, but I kind of take the opposite view, in that a great deal of thought by my team and others goes into who actually gets mailed, based on recent giving behavior and the relevancy of that communication. And particularly under the new GDPR guidelines that came out in 2018, we have a very strong legitimate interest policy to make sure that only those supporters that positively interacted with us in the last few years are given the right communications. In the past, even before I joined in 2016, would be somewhere over on the sort of right hand side of that diagram there, where we might be mailing in excess of 500,000 supporters in our case. But I was able to prove quite quickly really that that's all very well getting the maximum number of responses pretty much by mailing most supporters, but it doesn't really, as it says there on the sort of y-axis, maximize your contribution. So certainly in the first year of my 4 years so far, I was totally preoccupied in convincing fundraisers to reduce their mailing volume, and if you like, somewhere on the top of that curve, maximize their contribution. So from 2014 to 2018, to give you an example, we reduced our mailing volumes by 50%, and I still managed to show them that they could still achieve the same contribution, particularly on some of our bigger appeals like the Christmas, and we have a great daffodil appeal, which is our big spring appeal. Might touch on that in a minute, because every February, March, April, we launch this big nationwide great daffodil appeal. And obviously lockdown and COVID hit right in the middle of our biggest income opportunity of the year. And as a result of that, we've had to adapt pretty quickly. So I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I do understand prediction models and the world of recency, frequency and value. And I've actually found, maybe quite ironically in the last couple of years, that a more basic, if you like, recency, frequency, value model is just as good as a prediction model, given we're in a world of reduced mailing volume in terms of who I'm trying to target for supporters responding to our appeals. Whereas in the 5, 10, 15 years ago, I was always using prediction models for the same kind of pieces of work. So I thought that was quite an interesting observation, which I'm happy to explore if anybody's got questions later. Also, as I said, we were hit really hard right in the middle of our biggest appeal in March. And what we've done, which has never happened for Marie Curie before, is we launched an emergency appeal. And I suppose many people would say, yeah, so is every other charity. But what I would say, though, is that our charity has been absolutely amazing in turning this around. We actually mailed on the 27th of March, which is literally a few days later since we all went down into lockdown, which I think for a charity like ours shows an amazing amount of fast turnaround. We're also being in the if you like, a very relevant sector for the crisis. 40% of our income is is around the NHS contracts. You know, we provide the nurses for the terminally ill. So it's a very relevant cause given what's been going on. And 60% of our income comes from fundraising income. And that particular piece is like, how do we address our potentially very rapid downturn in our fundraising income? I know Catherine mentioned cash, and this emergency appeal is a cash appeal. And we've had a phenomenal response to our shortfall on income. You know, record results, ×3 the normal net contribution of a campaign just from this emergency appeal alone. And it's short term, it's really helped our cash flow. I'll come on to in a minute some other real challenges around other areas of fundraising that we've had to temporarily close down, but that's a piece of good news. And I think the rainbow postcard on the top left there is also very, very relevant too. I've got mine in my window here. I know you can see them around the country, the different rainbows, but I think that kind of thank you postcard that everybody got from donating to our cause, you know, there's something tangible there and relevant about displaying the fact that you helped in our emergency appeal and providing for the terminally ill. I think that was a really good message to put out back in mid-May. On to the second I very quickly, is investigate. So something that I do a lot of is digging down into data. So this is an example of regular giving. So the flip side of cash is that we like to look after our direct debit donors who give monthly to us, and we have an in-house face-to-face fundraising team. So you may see these typical charities asking to sign up for a monthly direct debit, but we've had to close that team down since March, and that represents a real headache for the charity going forward. You know, when is the right time to go back onto the high street and ask for direct debits? It's quite a way up on your social conscience as to whether you think that's the right thing to do in the high street right now. We're not doing that at the moment, and I'm kind of behind the scenes tracking these direct debits. You know, so if we're not recruiting, can we at least in a lot of detail track what's going to happen with any spikes in potential cancellations of our existing regular givers? I'm not going to go into these graphs here, but I build a lot of, you know, Power BI dashboards, and my director are always asking, you know, are we seeing the danger of any economic downturn biting on our regular giving file? At the moment, we're not, but this is an enormously important income stream for us. And, you know, if we're not recruiting, the file can only go one way longer term. So, you know, a big challenge there, but I'll come on to more of the insight later. But, you know, investigating and just showing people some really simple dashboards on what's going on with 7-day moving averages for cancellations, or on the right hand side there's a chart here that talks about, are we losing our very important longer term regular givers who have been giving in some cases 20 or 30 years since the first standing orders came along. You know, we absolutely don't want to be losing those very loyal regular givers. So I do a lot of digging down on those kind of data trends. The third I is inform. So I start to talk quite a lot in the next few slides about maps. Maps is my #1 kind of analysis technique at Marie Curie, partly because fundraisers understand maps and they don't particularly, I don't know, understand tables of data from prediction models and so on. So this is just a quite nice kind of image of our business, where I show a map on the left-hand side of our fundraising income per 10K population. In the middle is our number of supporters per 10K population. And on the right are patients, again, per 10K population. This is a relative measure against the population. Green is good, if you like. It's where we've got a high presence of income supporters and patients. And red is, if you like, under indexing compared to an average around 100, a fairly standard kind of way of showing the highs and lows of a business. And we're quite an unusual charity in that the greens coincide more with areas like Scotland and Northern Ireland than perhaps the southeast and southwest, where traditionally that's the kind of charity heartland for affluence and demographics. I think it's quite nice that I'm analysing a database that's different to the normal southeast bias. I could talk more and more about this, but this is a fact sort of based set of maps. This is what's happening, and on the right hand side you've got the greens for patients, on the left hand side you've got fundraising income. So you start to ask the question, is there a link between the presence on the ground where we're caring for patients on the right hand side, and ultimately does that manifest itself into fundraising income on the left hand side? So you start getting into the question of causation. This is just facts at the moment, but can we prove that what we deliver on the ground has a direct link with the amount of fundraising income that we can generate and therefore feed back into caring for more patients? So I just want to set the scene with the inform, and then we move on to the world of insight. I'll just move that away a second. And what I'm sort of asking, I've kind of asked that question on the previous page, can I prove that link between a high volume of patients, if you like, and a high fundraising income? So what we've done is actually, I'll bring them all up, we built a prediction model, but not as you know it, in terms of, I don't know, predicting individual supporters. We're actually predicting which geographical areas of the country have various components of a prediction model. So what I mean by that is, if I've got, I don't know, an income type of community fundraising or individual giving or legacies, if we've got certain activities going on, like 9 hospices or the nursing services where we're treating, 30,000 plus patients a year, and if we've got fundraising group members who are actually going out there and fundraising for us, and then there's another element of volunteers on the right hand side, what you can do is build a prediction model. In this case, it's at something called a lower super output area level, 42,000 units of geography, and we're building a model at that to say, let's overlay all of the elements of our Marie Curie, if you like, service provision or hotspots, and can we equate that to a fundraising income for each of those units of geography? And that's essentially what we did. We're able to explain why fundraising income is higher in certain areas of the country. A lot of work going on in this project, and I don't think I've ever explained it so quickly in about a minute or two. But this project is something that I named Big Shift. And as Ruth mentioned, this kind of more of a prediction causation project of proving the link between service provision and income was a winner last year in the Institute of Fundraising Awards. And I think it partly won because of our use of maps. It's a way of very graphical, visual way of explaining data models. And we've managed to use these kind of big shift models for a number of different pieces of work since, answering questions like, on the right hand side is taken from a related project, which basically asks the questions, where in the country should we set up new fundraising groups? Or what does the catchment area of all of our 150 or so shops look like around the country? You can start to pose loads of questions, but they're all based on defining catchments and building comprehensive data sets around our own geography and how we operate. So just kind of wanted to share very briefly an example of insight which moves on from inform and fact into genuine business understanding about what is driving our business and what is driving our fundraising income. How can we learn from that? We're starting to think about strategies like, what if we do care for more patients? That's all very well, but we'd have to change our business model from several hours of overnight treatment for our patients to perhaps more rapid response service of a few hours visits for patients. Is that going to alter our fundraising, or would it actually have the opposite effect, because shorter visits might not mean as much, if you like, quality is the wrong word, but looking after patients for longer periods of time probably is more memorable further down the line in terms of in memory and legacy gifts as well. So we've got a whole set of questions around the mix of the types of patient services that we're caring for. That kind of makes sense. I'm very aware of time. I'm going to sort of go over this very quickly, but I just want to sneak in a second insight part very quickly, which was when COVID landed at our doorsteps, I was also asked, I know I work in fundraising, but I kind of work across the whole of Marie Curie as well, just partly with reputation with my operational research work, but we built the classic kind of workforce flow model. So, you know, we've got a very real problem in that we've got to maintain our nursing service care and the staffing levels at a time when people are going into self-isolation, they're social distancing, they're on sick leave, they've got furlough, they've got holiday. How do you put all of those kind of flows of people's employee state into a workforce prediction model? So this is a classic Excel modeling problem that I got heavily involved in, and obviously a really useful planning aid in trying to predict what the future may look like in terms of our staffing levels and whether we can cope. So I just want to again give a flavour. It's not just about dashboards, it's not just about prediction models, it's also about your classic what if Excel modelling scenarios as well. Perhaps the last piece as well is that I'm very resourceful. So I do work with companies like More Metrics. I know Colin Stewart's presented at the OR conference before, and he's very kindly, his company provided some free, very good data sets to help us track COVID. I know you can get all these from official government sources, but his data is very rich, and we use that to show our nursing service directorate where we think the hotspots will occur. And I've actually noticed that our Power BI maps are almost telling us the news before it comes out 2 days later, whether it's Leicester or Bolton or whatever. I kind of see this stuff before it becomes news, and I quite like delivering these kind of dashboards. And it's just a prime example of deploying these Power BI. It doesn't have to be Power BI, but any kind of visualization, and all the stakeholders around the organization get to see it through looking at it on a web application. So that's, we do a lot of sharing of these charts and so on. That's pretty much it in terms of what I wanted to talk about. As I say, when I wrote this presentation a couple of weeks back, I'd heard I just won an award for fundraising excellence, and I've been in the charity sector about, I don't know now, about 20 years near enough, and I feel like this is a good point in my journey where I spent 10 plus years in the agency world, in companies called Ockham, and I co-founded somebody called Wood for Trees. So I've basically got to the stage in the last 4 years where I chose Marie Curie as my choice, really, where I was able to apply all that learning of operational research back from my days in British Airways as well. And I feel like it's been if you like, a 30-year journey of doing really practical operational research stuff to get to a point last week when I was quite humbled really to receive this award. And to get that when you're working amongst so many brilliant fundraisers, as I say, was yeah, quite I suppose quite emotional for me really, and I feel quite proud to have received that.
That's thanks. That's a fantastic point to end on, Steve.
Thank you. So yeah,
really heartwarming. Congratulations.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, and thank you very much, and congratulations on that. I wonder if we can have all of our panelists making themselves visible, and I would like to invite questions from the audience. So I just sort of brought that to an end, because those of you who were in the plenary session will know that we will be cut off at 2 o'clock. Even if anybody's speaking, we will just be forced out. And it's quite possible it might happen a little bit sooner, depending on everybody getting their systems right. So I would encourage you to put questions in. And we have, at the moment, we have 2 questions, one technical and one soft. And I'm going to start with the soft one first, because although it's aimed at Kat and Rod, I think Steve will have a view on it as well, which is do you have a feel for the types of charity that are likely to survive and what you think the best ones are doing differently? So I'll ask Kat and Rod to comment first, but then I'll go over to Steve as well for that.
Rod, do you think you're better placed to answer that one than I, or not necessarily?
I mean, I don't mind taking a stab at it. I mean, it's a difficult one to answer in any definitive terms. I mean, I think what I would say that's been surprising in some ways about this is that we've found some of the sort of received wisdom about how charities should think about their own resilience has been slightly turned on its head, in that those organizations, certainly in the early stages of the pandemic, who had diversified their income streams and gone more towards a reliance on traded income as opposed to fundraising income, found themselves perhaps in an even worse situation than others, because all of a sudden a reliance on charity shops or charity cafes or social enterprise trading, that dropped off a cliff. Whereas at least, even if it was more difficult to go out and face-to-face fundraise, people were able to continue to give online. I think also some of the received wisdom, for instance, about what level of reserves organizations should be holding has been interesting, because organizations are sort of told historically to hang on to about 3 months worth of reserves, because anything beyond that looks slightly profligate. Whereas actually, as soon as a pandemic of this kind or another crisis of this scale hits, all of a sudden it's those who have large amounts of reserves who are slightly more buffered against it. So I think it's hard to say which organizations will be better in terms of specific org types or sectors. I think those that are most adaptable will be the ones that are able to thrive over the longer term, and probably those that are able to respond in terms of more collaboration, possibly even entertaining more radical solutions like merger over the long term. I mean, it's going to be a difficult time, I think, for the sector, and the sector that we end up with on the other side of the sort of medium-term impact of the pandemic will probably look relatively different to how it looks now.
Thanks. Kat? Want to add anything to that, Catherine? Or
well, not all that much, really. I mean, we did ask charities some of those questions around, reserves, and we know, I mean, they weren't included in the deck that we talked about today, but we know that lots of them are looking at how they manage their reserves best. So yeah, I mean, there are definitely lots of charities considering exactly all those things that Rod has just talked about.
Thanks. And what does it look like on the ground, Steve? What's your view on survival?
Yeah, it's a tricky one to answer. I do talk to some of the agencies that supply the charity sector, and it's anecdotal, so I wouldn't say it as gospel, but we've had, and I'm sure we're one of many charities that have had to freeze our spend on external suppliers, and freeze any spend, and budgets in general are extremely tough. But I have heard anecdotally that it's very ironic. We still seem to care for our pets and our dogs and our cats, sort of charities, and I've heard that they're doing okay. It might be an unfair thing to say, but that's what I've heard, and they're still spending with their suppliers. Whereas the human element of the medical sector are struggling. But I can only speak for the several charities that are in those kind of 2 sectors that I've spoken to with suppliers, and I just find it quite, I don't know, we do care for pets, but I find it quite ironic as well at the same time. So maybe a controversial thing to say, but I'd like to understand the different sectors going forward. Within the charity, there are 10 to 15 different types of charity sector, and I'm sure some will struggle more than others.
Just to add to that, actually, we haven't actually published it yet, but our upcoming UK Giving report will look at cause areas, and we did see some very big shifts over the last few months, as you might expect. Actually, I think animal charities did sort of dip a little bit, along with kids charities as well, both of which are normally, as you say, very popular, and medical research as well went down. But I think the cause that we call hospitals and hospices shot up, and I think that must have been people thinking about NHS charities, probably the likes of Captain Tom and his, walk around his garden and all that kind of stuff played into that. So there was a definite mood that we saw as well in our data.
Thanks. Thank you. We have a question which is definitely more for Steve, of somebody who would be interested to hear more about recency frequency work versus prediction, how they compared. Steve, is that something that you can answer in 1 minute? Otherwise we can follow up outside this, because there's obviously room for contacting speakers outside this using the app and following up.
I'll try and do it in 30 seconds. I think the answer is really GDPR. It forces you to think about who you're selecting, as I've said, and most charities will have something like, I don't know, a 2 or 3 year legitimate interest policy of who you can contact. Otherwise you'll be under immense scrutiny as to why you're contacting people that haven't interacted with you for many years. And as a result of that, you're left with a limited database, arguably, and you're almost going down the route of almost just coming up with some simple segments around recency frequency value. So 500,000, we may be mailing 100,000, for example. You don't need a prediction model for that. You're just looking at recency. And I do think GDPR is a great thing, and it just means there is a role for more simplified models as a result of it.
Thank you. One question is from Martin Utley, is how common do we think it is for charities to have in-house access to levels of analytical skills like Steve's? I know that both CAF and Marie Curie do, but any of you want to take that question?
I think it's a tricky one. I think I'm fairly unique in that I used to run analytical teams at agencies, and I've taken a lifestyle choice to do something that for me, is giving something back to a worthy cause. So if you like, I may not necessarily be on the salary that I could be in the commercial world, but I think so. It's a lifestyle choice. It's not actually that common for charities to have someone or a team like mine. They normally spend outwards into the agency world and get suppliers and specialists to help them. But if you're a really big charity, it goes the other way, and you can have sometimes 10 to 20 insight analysts. So I could name a few of the very top charities that would have 10 times the size of my team, but it's very rare to have that. It's normally just 1 or 2 individuals trying to do their best on limited resources. That's kind of how it works.
Thanks. I'm sure that CAF has a view on that as well, but I can see we may only have half a minute left. So at this point, I do want to make sure that even though there's a couple of questions left in the chat, I do want to make sure that I thank all of our speakers today. It's a shame we can't organise vast quantities of applause, but I think it's been most enlightening, and I'd like to thank you all for the efforts that you've put in to share all this information with us. So thanks very much to all of you.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Ruth.
Thank you.